books get adapted for screen, it's inevitable that not every character will make the jump. Often, the first casualties of this are smaller, more minor characters who don't necessarily have much impact on the wider plot going forward. The Night's Watch is one of these areas where many of these smaller characters are cut, and even though some minor ones, such as Pip and Grenn, did make it into the show, they were killed off very early when they are still alive in the book. For me, one of the most interesting lost Night's Watch characters is Donal Noye, who on the surface is just the one-armed blacksmith to the Night's Watch, but when you dig a little bit deeper, he played an important role in the history of Westeros, specifically with his connection to Robert Baratheon. Before joining the Night's Watch, Donal was an armourer and a blacksmith at Storm's End, the seat of the then Lord Robert Baratheon. It was Noye who forged Robert Baratheon's famous warhammer that dealt the killing blow to Rhaegar Targaryen during the Battle of the Trident, and changed the history of Westeros forever. Donal would take a small wound during the war, which ended up getting infected, and as a result he lost his arm. With the loss of his arm, Donal questioned if he had the skill needed to be a blacksmith, and he chose to take the black and come to the wall, as even a one-armed smith would still be useful there. Years later, during the events of A Game of Thrones, when Jon Snow arrives at Castle Black, Jon beats his fellow recruits during training despite the fact they were older than him, making him very few friends and many enemies. However, Donal talks to Jon and forces him to see the situation from a different perspective. He points out to Jon that he has had advantages that others never had, that Jon, although a bastard, he was a high-born one who grew up in a castle and trained with a master at arms his whole life, where most of the boys he was training with had never even picked up a real sword before joining the Watch. While a bastard, Jon was still a lord's bastard, with much more privilege than his peers of the Watch. This conversation with Noye makes Jon realise the rough circumstances the other boys grew up in, and he starts to train the others himself as if a master at arms would, earning him their respect and friendship, but also the annoyance of Sir Alliser Thorne, the master at arms of the Watch. Jon's reaction to Noye's advice results in a friendship of sorts between Jon and Donal. Later, it is Donal who has to refit armour to fit Samwell Tarly so he can train. Jon also likes to assist Donal in the armoury, and he is with Jon when news of his father's arrest reaches Castle Black. After Lord Commander Jeor Mormont is attacked by Whites, he brings the burned longsword, Longclaw, to Donal's armoury for repairs before gifting it to Jon. Later, during the events of A Clash of Kings, Donal talks to Jon about his brother, Robb, being named king in the north. Jon is still coming to terms with this, but tells Donal that he thinks Robb will make a good and just king. But Donal then tells Jon it was him who had forged Robert Baratheon's famed warhammer, that after Robert became king, he was never the same man. The Robert Noye knew was made for fighting and war, and the moment that stopped, he rusted and he became a very different sort of person. Robert the Lord became Robert the King. When talking about Robert's brothers, Stannis and Renly, he tells Jon that Stannis has always been made of pure iron, black and strong, but ultimately brittle, that he'll break before he bends no matter what the cost. While Renly is more like copper, bright and shiny, nice to look at the end of the day, not really worth that much. As Jon and a large amount of the Night's Watch prepare to march north of the Wall on Lord Commander Mormont's great ranging, they say their goodbyes. Donal tells Jon to bring back his missing uncle, Benjen Stark, with Jon promising him he will. During the events of A Storm of Swords, Donal finds himself as one of the most senior members of the Watch left at Castle Black. When Jon escapes the wildlings and runs back to Castle Black to warn of the coming attack, Donal is very worried that Jon has deserted the Watch. He ends up trusting Jon and bringing him to Maester Aemon for treatment for his wounds. Despite only having one arm, Donal manages to carry Jon to Aemon and hold him down as the Maester pulls the arrows from Jon. Jon is happy to see Donal and be back at the Wall, but Donal is concerned about Jon's facial scars received during an attack by an eagle walked by the wildling Orell. Donal updates him on the events of Castle Black, and Maester Aemon tells Jon the terrible news of Lord Commander Mormont's death in the mutiny at Craster's Keep. Jon explains about the wildling group south of the Wall, and admits he broke his Night's Watch vow with Ygritte, a wildling girl he had fallen in love with. During the Battle of Castle Black, Donal Noye takes command, being one of the very few most senior members of the Watch still at the wall. He warns the villagers of Molestown about the attack, but during the assault on Castle Black, the attacking Thenns manage to claim the stairs despite severe losses, and the remaining men of the Watch flee to the wall. Donal had prepared for this by drenching the last landings with oil. He has burning arrows fired at it, and the attacking Thenns perish to a man. Donal then leads the defence against Mance Rayder's vast army to the north of the wall. The wildlings have no ladders to climb the wall, so they attack the gate. When a giant begins to break it, Donal gives command of the wall to Jon and leaves with a handful of men to save the gate. Donal is successful in stopping the wildlings at the gate, at the cost of his life and those of the men with him. Jon later finds that the giant mag crushed Donald's spine and that Donal impaled his sword in the giant's throat. When the Night's Watch is on the brink of defeat, Stannis Baratheon appears with his army and defeats the wildlings. According to Stannis, if the wildlings had already taken the wall, this may not have been possible. Ultimately, Donal Noye's role in the book is minimal, with him mostly centered around being a friend to Jon and being a mentor figure to him. Perhaps the biggest impact he has on the story at large was just before his death, and having the confidence in Jon to give him command of the wall during the battle against the wildlings. Not having Donal on the show doesn't ultimately affect the story too much, as most of his significant contributions to it can easily be taken by other characters. So it makes sense why he would not make the cut when attempting to reduce the amount of characters on the show. Part of his roles were given to 3 different people in the show, with Tyrion given the role of helping Jon when he first joins the Watch, and giving him the advice that humbles him and allows him to make friends and help his new brothers. So Alliser Thorne later seems to take some of Donal's role during the battle against the wildlings, taking command of the Night's Watch. Later, when Alliser is wounded, Jon then steps up and takes command. Grenn then replaces Donal in the holding of the gate against the giants, and is killed doing so in a similar fashion to Noye. The Battle of the Wall in the show is very different to the version of it in the books. However, it is one of my favourite battles in the show. In fact, I would go as far to say it's one of my favourite episodes of the show. There is this vibe and feeling to it that I remember making it thrilling to watch for the first time. However, there is a key difference when it comes to Grenn taking Noye's role. When Noye chooses to defend the gate, he is in command. The difference in the show is Jon commands Grenn, his close friend, to hold the gate, knowingly sending his friend to his death. Grenn also seems to know this as well, but does what Jon commands without question. The way in which the show handles Grenn's death helps in providing more emotional weight to the fight, and is great character growth for Jon. It's one of these moments where the books were changed that I think it did actually benefit the show in some way. It's a moment I would point to in the first 4 seasons of Game of Thrones that shows that David Benioff and D.B. Weiss were capable of good writing and well done character development, creating plot twists even book fans did not expect, which makes the poor and lazy writing in the later seasons even more frustrating, as both Benioff and Weiss showed they had some decent ability as writers during these early seasons, which makes their writing in the later seasons seem even more lazy. It would have been nice to have seen Donal in the show, but like Vargo Hoat, his absence doesn't really detract from the show or the story too much, and did provide some fantastic scenes that didn't happen in the book.